I'm Matt.
And I'm Jess.
And I can't believe you haven't seen Goodfellas.
Well, to keep with the theme so far on all the ones we've done, I have now.
You have now. You did the thing. You took care of that thing for that guy.
There's a lot of things for guys in this one.
A lot of things. Yeah.
Man, our mob accents are terrible.
It's not going to be the last time you hear it today.
Probably not, no.
Yeah. So, welcome back to I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen with Jess and Matt. Thank you, everyone that has listened and tuned into all of our episodes so far. We've gotten some great responses from so many of you. It's been fun to see.
Yeah, it's been kind of wild. And shout out to all of our friends who also couldn't believe I hadn't seen Inside Out.
Or me having seen my best friend's wedding. There was
yeah.
actually quite a few people that I had saying, like, really? Really? You grew up in the 90s. Like,
there's been a lot of that feedback. It's been awesome. So thanks everybody for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we got a lot of great friends. And even some people, one of the funny things about doing a podcast is you get to see like the locations of where people listen in. And we have people listening like in Europe. We recently got a view in Asia, some South America. Like it's kind of cool.
It's wild. So
yeah.
Thanks.
Thank everyone for listening. And for our 5th episode, we are talking about the 1990 Martin Scorsese classic gangster film, Goodfellas. And this was Jess's first time seeing it. This is a pretty legendary movie. It stars Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Lorraine Bracco, Paul Sorvino, has all sorts of cameos from actors that would become even more well-known through the years. Samuel L. Jackson, Illeana Douglas, Debbie Mazur, all sorts of people. It was released on September 19th, 1990, which we found out is almost 35 full years ago.
Why you gotta do that to us?
I know.
I prefer the years ago, so I don't have to confront how old we are.
My back hurt just saying 35 years
Yeah, you made my gray hair hurt.
This was a really well-received movie when it first came out and has been continued to be very well-received. It did receive 6 Academy Award nominations that year. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor for Joe Pesci, who won the Oscar.
I could see that.
Lorraine Bracco for Best Supporting Actress. Best Adapted Screenplay. The screenwriter Nicholas Pileggi actually was the one that wrote the book memoir based on Henry Hill, the main character. And Best Editing for Thelma Schoonmaker, one of Martin Scorsese's longtime collaborators. Won a bunch of other awards. Unfortunately, it only won the one Academy Award. It did lose to the juggernaut Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves.
Oh, that was a big movie in the 90s, though. I remember.
It was. We'll probably talk a little bit more about the Oscars at some point in time. I would think I might bring it up later, too.
It's not on my list, but yeah. I could see how it would be on yours.
That's fair.
Dances with Wolves, Pocahontas, and Avatar, all the same movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's a discussion for another day.
I do like Dances with Wolves more than Pocahontas. Maybe more than Avatar. I'm not a big Avatar fan.
Yeah, no, neither am I. That's again, this is not a discussion for today, but
yeah, it's also no shade at Dances with Wolves. It's fine. It's a fine movie.
But it's not full of Goodfellas.
It isn't. It is not full.
See how I did that?
Of Goodfellas. So as is our tradition, I will hand the reins to Jess to direct the conversation since it's her first time. I am utterly fascinated as to where this conversation is going to go because there is so many potential things to talk about with this movie.
Yes, as you alluded to before we got started, my notes are extensive.
Yes.
Now, in some places, like the pages in my phone, in some places, it's just me being like, what? What did I just watch? Or poor Henry having to dig this body up after that long. Like, that's, some of it is just that.
Here's a wing.
So some of it's not actually notes regarding the overarching themes or things I want to talk about necessarily, just stuff where I'm like, Huh.
I did that with Steel Magnolias too, so that makes sense.
Yes, that seems to be a thing. Okay, my very first thing is, oh, Marty.
Okay, so this is actually, before we watched this, I actually asked you this, because I know we have seen a couple of Scorsese movies together.
We have.
We watched The Departed, which also would have been fun for this podcast had we been doing the podcast by that point.
Although, now that you've said that, I'm like, I have a lot of thoughts about The Departed in relation to this movie. Not today.
Yes.
I also have a lot of thoughts about Wolf of Wall Street in relation to this movie.
Yes, which Wolf of Wall Street you had seen before we started dating.
Yeah, it's from way back for me.
We've both seen it. The other, I'm trying to think of the other one was Shutter Island, that you had for sure seen.
Definitely.
And I think you said Taxi Driver as well.
Yes.
Seen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shutter Island has the rogue, the wild twist. Anyway. Oh, Marty was where I went with this. We talked a little bit about this at the end of the day yesterday, or at the end of the movie, I guess. And we don't usually talk in depth, but this had to be the breeziest Martin Scorsese film I've ever seen. This was one of the easiest 2.5 hour watches I've lived through, and full disclosure, Martin Scorsese's not exactly known for making short films.
Brevity.
Yeah, brevity's not his strong suit, and that's okay. You kind of get used to that, but it's a little like when we finished, I'm going to pull in a not Martin at all here, but when we finished Oppenheimer and I went, that was a Christopher Nolan movie.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get to the end of those long movies and I'm like, we could have cut half an hour out of this. We didn't need this. This just feels like a thing you loved and not a thing we needed. I didn't feel that way about any of this movie.
Yeah.
There was nothing in here where I was like, whoa, we could have done without that. I mean, plot-wise or pieces of the story. There was some violence I would have been cool if I didn't see, but that's just...
I think that's part and parcel of a story
movie.
that starts with, ever since I can remember I wanted to be a gangster, as the opening quote.
Straight up, yeah. Also, as you know, I like to dig into weird things on Wikipedia, so I'm endlessly fascinated by organized crime. I like to Wikipedia weird stuff, and so I fell down a rabbit hole of crime families in the States and crime families in Canada, which was super fun. But
immediately when the credits started rolling.
I kind of had before, full disclosure, my mom's a big true crime nerd and has been for a very long time, since before the advent of podcasts, to the point that I'm pretty sure she hasn't listened to a podcast, including ours. Which,
oh man, if she discovered true crime podcasts, she'd never leave the house.
I was like, it'd be bad news for Ma if she found true crime podcasting. It's kind of always been a thing. As a kid, I watched Law and Order, not Bluey, I don't know. And so Bluey didn't exist when we were kids, but I watched Law and Order probably before it was advisable for children, which I think is also a bit of a 90s thing. You probably watched this movie before you were supposed to as well. I wouldn't be surprised.
That's a very good question. This one maybe not, because I was only 8 years old when the movie came out, so I knew that it existed because Martin Scorsese was a big deal. I'm trying to think when it was that I watched this. I actually can't recall off the top of my head. It wasn't the first of his that I watched.
There you go.
I watched Taxi Driver before this, and I'm pretty sure I saw Taxi Driver.
Far younger than you were supposed to.
But yeah.
Anyway, so true crime, not a surprise. And then the first, based on a true story. And I'm like, well, now I'm in. Of course. How have I not seen this already? So I think that was cool for me. Did I hit something? So in the beginning of the movie, you're introduced, and I think maybe this is where I want to start, is narrative structure of this movie. Because there's a lot of thoughts I have about character development and the use of humor and all sorts of shit. And that's not what I have. I have humor listed first. But narrative structure starts at the beginning, and right up until the end, you know what's happening, but you don't know what's happening. So it's a really fascinating use of freeze frames.
Yes. And
voiceover. And when it switches between Henry and Karen's voices. So, wee baby Ray Liotta. And Lorraine Bracco. Which, good. I think we've said this in other episodes, but Love that she goes from being mob wife to mob therapist in The Sopranos. So
yeah, and
props on a fun career arc. Lorraine.
Yeah, she has that, and then there's the one very young kid, young Michael Imperioli, who went on to be an actor in The Sopranos as well. Who's Spider, who gets shot in the foot by Joe Pesci when he's doing the Oklahoma Kid, dance for me, kid, and actually shoots him in the foot because Tommy's great.
Yeah, he was very... I believe I actually have a line in here that I've written, Tommy is very hinged.
Yes.
Not unhinged, he's super hinged.
We're gonna get to Tommy, I imagine. But.
Yeah, there's a whole section on toxic masculinity chilling in here that we will get to, but... The narrative structure is not like a lot of other movies in that what you're watching, spoiler alert for a 35-year-old movie, the story is being told to you in obviously characters and acting and shots and all these things, but in a lot of voiceovers and freeze frames. And I like the way freeze frame got used when background was required. It was almost like a fourth wall break.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you have a bunch of points where it's like the fourth wall, it's like a pause, and Henry or Karen, because they're the two voiceovers, you don't get them from anybody else, those two kind of stop, and it's almost like if you could see them, they'd be stepping out into their own spotlight if it was a show, like a play, like a theater show, stepping into their own spotlight and going, and so this is who Tommy is, and this is why he's da-da-da, this is who Jimmy is, this is blah, blah, blah. So it was a really cool way of kind of pulling that fourth wall break in, which you don't get a lot of in film.
You don't, and actually, not only is the freeze frame that interesting fourth wall break that gives the audience a moment to contemplate something, and almost, you're right, is the step out moment, like of what just happened, and it's hammering something home. There is actually a fourth wall break.
Well, yeah, like, so the whole time I'm watching this, I'm like, this is cool. It's like it's breaking the fourth wall. And then it's when you get to the point where Henry and Karen are talking to, I'm assuming, the, like, FBI narc agent.
Yeah, to go into witness protection.
Yeah, so, and I like how I don't care what happens to you, I care what happens to him, but also if you're out, they'll kill you. It's like, well, empathy. I mean, I get it, they're criminals, so empathy's probably low for this agent. But anyway... So when they're talking, you realize that what you've been hearing this whole time isn't somebody telling you a story because they want to tell you a story. It's somebody confessing and giving up and ratting out every single person that he's ever done crime with to save his own ass.
It's the confessional.
It's the confessional, which is a really interesting use of a fourth wall. And then when it gets to the actual trial and they start talking about him being a rat because rats will do anything to survive, isn't that true? And then he just literally steps out of the witness stand and completely breaks the fourth wall, but actively breaks the fourth wall. So it's like they had to pause it. It almost felt like the freeze frames were because it was in the past, and then as soon as he could break the fourth wall actively, he's moving. Wee baby Ray Liotta.
And it's the moment at the very, very end of the movie when he's testifying, giving up his friends, Jimmy, Polly, and is fully entering witness protection. And that's the signifier, right? Of like he is fully giving over this life and going into witness protection. And as he says, he's now an average nobody living in a weird suburb of nowhere, USA. And that is pretty much the last thing you see. So it doesn't happen until that point. But you're right. It does give a good, context to the rest of how the story's told. And I think it's why I think the voiceover works so well with this.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Voiceover in movies is not always greatly used. A lot of times it's a crutch for storytelling. Let me tell you a tale of this story with voiceover. And it's just the crutch to tell the inner monologue of what a character's thinking.
Yeah.
And with this film, it really takes some left turns, as you pointed out, of having it be like a fourth wall break, and then the fourth wall break that shows up gives the context that this is not a story, this is a confessional. This is me giving up all of my friends and giving the details that need to happen for it. It also, as you said, is one where the perspective shifts.
Yeah.
Karen jumps in at some point quite unexpectedly. Like they're on a their first date, a double date with Tommy and one of Karen's friends, you're not given any like warning as to like introducing this is going to be an important character. It's just kind of the scene cuts and suddenly Karen's in the center of the frame and she is now the inner monologue that's talking. So it really takes a left turn there, and then she jumps in throughout the remainder of the film.
Which I think is kind of how you talk, right? Mm-hmm. If we were, ratting out all our friends about nothing, but, even if we're having a conversation with people, that's how we talk, is we'll jump in. If you're telling a story, I'll be like, and then this happened, right?
This is how this podcast works.
Hello. So that I thought was a really interesting narrative device. I think it's a necessary background, because if you had this movie without the explanation, one, it doesn't make sense for the end, but two, you wouldn't know who Peter or Paul or Marie are, because everybody, according to Karen, is named Peter, Paul, and Marie, and then they name their daughters Marie, and it's big Italian crime families, which also we can get back to, but you would lose... Based on, like, I just tried to think about it last night after we watched this. If you didn't have that background, you would really lose who Polly is, who Tommy is, who Jimmy is. You wouldn't understand why it's such a big deal, or who's actually in charge, or, like, what a made man means, or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
It would just be watching these dudes run around shooting people and stealing Lufthansa things and heists, right? And so... It's a necessary narrative device, and it's important, and it doesn't just feel like, and now here's some background, because that, like you said, sometimes it's the inner monologue, or like, I need to explain a thing, womp, 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 womp. It works for me in the same way I have seen narrators work in live shows.
Yes.
This movie would not make a good live show.
No.
So that's not what I'm suggesting. As opposed to something like Steel Magnolias, which absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? There are some movies that you're like, yes, you'd make a great stage show because they happen in 3 places, blah, blah, blah. This happens in too many spots.
Yeah.
There's too much wild shit going on. It wouldn't make a great stage show, but they pull narrative devices from stage shows that help make it a better story.
Yes. Yeah.
I was a fan.
Yeah, completely. And it also, in the same way that it frames and talking about, yes, this is... I am, testifying and confessing against these people in the organized crime family that I was a part of. It also, when you go back and watch it again and again, you realize that's why there's not a lot of details about Henry's own family. Because that's not the story. That's not the important thing. That's not what he's talking about. He would talk about, like, how he wanted to be a gangster and how they lived across the street from, Tootie Cicero's taxi station and pizza joint, and he always wanted to work there because he saw the life. And kind of his parents were a total afterthought. The only time there really is anything meaningful about his parents is a very brief scene talking about, his father beating him with a belt because he hasn't been to school in months and has been lying to them, and he's just been going to the cab stand to work for the Ciceros. That's kind of it, other than the fact that you see his brother who's in a wheelchair a couple of different times through the story. Like, this is not a story about his family. And I don't know if that means he doesn't love his family. I think he probably does. But that's not the story he's telling.
So that's an interesting gateway into kind of another point. /2. One is, what do we make of Henry Hill? Why do you want to be a gangster so bad? Right? So that's because he says that at the beginning. He shows up at one point and shows his mom his shoes. And her first sentence is, you look like a gangster. His mail gets sent to the house saying he hasn't gone to school, and all of a sudden the Italian mob dudes are like, well, we'll just beat up the poor mail clerk and threaten to bake him in the pizza oven if he ever brings mail back. Poor dude's just trying to deliver the mail. All right, cool. I mean, not cool for him, I'm sure, but c'est la vie. And so there's this, in the beginning, it's the what are your motivations? And then, I think it keeps going, and you're like, oh, he's in too deep and blah, blah, blah. But... we've said the word a bunch now. And there's an interesting line that Karen has about it's almost like he had 2 families.
Yeah.
What does family mean in this movie?
Yeah, and Henry's context to family is sort of two minds. Even so, within his immediate family, his mother is Sicilian, pure-blooded Italian. His father is Irish.
Yes.
Two obviously well-noted ties to organized crime in the United States and worldwide. But he sort of has the area of like, yeah, I'm half Italian, half Irish. And in his family, they are not a wealthy family, living in New York in a very small apartment. And he gives a little bit of context there about his father being very angry and very upset. And he was upset that his brother was in a wheelchair. He was upset they were living in such a small apartment with
7 of them.
7 of them.
Yeah.
He was upset that he didn't make a lot of money at his construction job, I think. And then eventually he was getting upset at Henry because he was hanging out at the cab stand because he knew what went on there. He was connected like anybody living in those parts of New York in the 50s.
50s into the 60s, yeah.
Would have been. So I think his father is upset that he's poor and doesn't make money and has been dealt probably what he feels like is a bum hand with having a big family and can't make ends meet and having a son that is in a wheelchair for unknown reasons. We're never really told. That probably carries over to young Henry of seeing people across the street living a life, not having consequences, not having to pay parking tickets, not like being big shots and being respected, and him seeing his dad feeling like he doesn't have that respect. Probably from a young age, the appeal there is the respect that he sees these men in the mafia having. And the crystallizing point of that is as he's young, before they do the jump to him being a 21-year-old, there's the scene where he gets brought in by the police for selling cigarettes out of the trunk of a car with young Tommy. And he gets brought in, and the mafia lawyer is there defending him, gives the smile to the judge. The judge is like, oh, okay, I know, the fix is in. And they let him off after the trial. He doesn't say anything. And none of Henry's family is there, but all of the Ciceros, Tommy's there.
Oh yeah.
Jimmy's there. All of his mafia family are there to congratulate him and hug him and give him a huge round of applause outside the courtroom. And that's one of the most impactful of the freeze frames.
Yeah, and I think when I talk about family, for Henry, he talks about wanting to belong. Mm-hmm. And I wonder a little bit, too, because he's talking about his dad being Irish. His mom was happy that he was hanging out with guys from the old country, right? Mm-hmm. Fine. Would his dad have felt the same way if it was an Irish mob? Do you know what I mean? And
yeah.
maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't have. And that's not a conversation road we can necessarily go down. We don't know. Mm-hmm. However, I think for Henry, he talks about wanting to belong and be part of something.
Yeah.
And how you're part of the family, but you're not actually part of the family until you're a made man. Mm-hmm. You're part of the associates.
Yeah.
You're part of the family, but you're not really all the way in until you're a made man. And he can't be one.
Yeah.
And Jimmy cannot be one because they are not purely Italian.
Yeah, and I think that's why as the movie goes on and Henry and Karen are married and Jimmy and Mickey, his wife, get married. That's why they end up, I think, being the ones that are the closest to each other, because Tommy is obviously the third part of their tripod. But
well done.
Jinx. But Tommy doesn't really settle down, for one, doesn't really get married. So
despite his mother's best efforts. What an Italian mom stereotype that one
great.
was.
She's so great.
I love her. Stop painting religious things.
We're going to talk about her later. I know. I'm going to bring her up later. But Tommy isn't married, so doesn't have that connection that the other two potentially do. But they, at one point, Tommy is going to be made. He is pure Sicilian, and the plan is for him to be made. Yeah, because the other two can't. They're almost like the outsiders that are still... Essentially, they're so high up in the organization that if they were purely Sicilian, they'd be made.
And that's the thing, right? I found this really interesting thread of you belong and you're family, but you don't belong all the way.
Yeah.
And so they trust the two of them, like, as you said, I think all three, right? The Henry, Tommy, Jimmy, which is funny because Henry, right? Like, so not anything like the rest of the Italian names that we hear. This is,
Henry Hill.
Henry Hill, and then we have, like, Jimmy Roast Beef and stuff. Anyway, and Maury, who's a fun one as well. But there's this very distinct thread for him, and you can understand how someone like Henry Hill gets himself involved because he just wants to feel like he's a part of something.
Yeah.
And he does, and they let him be a part of something, and they have meals together. Food plays a very interesting part in this movie. And there's this ongoing, all the women get together and have a whatever, I can't remember what she calls it, but the like, essentially the Tupperware party, but it's a makeup party.
Yeah.
A hostess
Spa
party.
day, yeah.
Hostess party, which was a big thing in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
In 70s and so forth. Stopped less now, but it used to be a really big thing. The point is, there's this... And it really hit me when Karen says it's like he has two families.
Yeah.
So he has a family he's born into, and then this family he's worked his way into. And it's Jimmy who, before he goes and gets greeted by the, identical lookalikes of Italian stereotypes, who are like, congratulations, yay, you did it, you beat the rep. It's Jimmy who comes up to him first.
Yeah.
And puts his arm around him and says... you did the right thing, kid. You remembered the two most important. And hello, foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything.
Never rat on your friends. Yeah.
Never rat on your friends and keep your mouth shut. Ha, ha, ha. Boy, does that come back to bite him. But those two have that connection because they are part of something bigger than them.
Yeah.
But they can't ever fully be part of something bigger than them. Polly can't leave. Like, Polly's succession plan, so to speak, corporate jargon, isn't Jimmy. It can't be Jimmy.
No, it's bloodline.
It can't be Henry. As much as he probably trusted, and based on that one conversation he has with him about, don't get involved with the drugs, Henry. And Henry's like, no, not me, never. Spoiler alert, it's the narcotics that gets him in the end. If he had been full-blooded Italian, you get the impression by that conversation he has with Polly where he says, Tommy is too much of a wild man. And Jimmy is, I can't remember what he says, something about like Jimmy being too jumpy, but I can't remember the specifics.
Yeah, impulsive. I don't remember what the wording is, but yeah, something around
Like Tommy's impulsive and Jimmy is too worried about something. Anyway, the point is, of the three of them, you get the feeling that were he fully Italian, Polly would have had Henry closer.
Yeah, Henry does feel at one point like the most level-headed of them, to the point where Polly treats him more as a bit of a confidant, because Tommy is full-blooded Italian, but Polly is overseeing everything going on, and even he goes like, yeah, I love Tommy, but he's a wild man. He's going to do something wrong.
And boy, does he.
Yeah. And Jimmy, I mean, when we're introduced to Jimmy, we're introduced to him already being older, because he's about a decade older than Henry and Tommy-ish in the story. And when he introduces Jimmy the Jet Conway, that he is already talking about like having been in jail at like 14 and done his first hit for a mob boss when he was 17. Like he clearly has been entrenched in it for a long time, but also entrenched in a way that he doesn't have a problem with killing someone or with doing something that other people may have some qualms about doing. So Jimmy is introduced as just this person who is a little extreme, even though he's not the impulsive one like Tommy. He's more calculated, but he's also probably the coldest.
Yeah, I don't remember. I wish I'd written it down. I didn't put the specifics, but yeah, you get the feeling that Henry just so desperately wants to be part of something important. And again, it's the two separate families, right? And I love that wedding scene where Karen looks up and it's just this whole row of folks giving identical envelopes full of money. It's like, here's something to help you get started, Karen. Here's something to help you get started, Karen. And she's like, I don't know any of you. This is wild.
There was a sale on at the greeting card store for that exact same, printed envelope.
Yeah. Hallmark sale. Perhaps kind of in a related, and this is something I've been talking about a lot lately in life, given spoken word and other things I do, but talking about family, one of the things, there's this one scene where the owner of the tiki bar is asking Polly to go in on it with him. He's like, you gotta help me, Polly, because Tommy keeps running up bills and not paying it, and he's unhinged. And so this is a problem. If you go in on it, then I know that it'll work. And it does, to a point. And then it stops because they have run it into whatever they can do for usefulness, and then they end up just, burning it to the ground, literally. But Henry's in on that too. And it's Henry who's in on that. It's not Jimmy. It's obviously not Tommy, because Tommy's the problem. It's Henry. So it's kind of that like, oh, we should probably do this, Polly. So that confidant level of trust he has in the family. But he also makes a comment about how, and I have written it down, hundreds of guys have depended on Polly. And they depend on Polly for protection, for things. These are people who can't go to the cops. And there's a lot of talk throughout the movie about unions. And Karen and the women justifying to themselves that what their husbands do is okay. Because they're just blue-collar dudes trying to get a little bit of a bigger piece of the pie. And I thought it was really a wild choice in narrative, or the idea that they're just blue-collar, because that's the kind of the immigrant tale, right? You come to the U.S. and you just work, and there's a lot of people for whom that's true, right? Who did work their fingers to the bone. Maybe that's true of Henry's dad, and that's part of the issue, right? Could have been true of Jimmy's. I don't know what side Jimmy's dad, mom, Italian versus Irish. We never find out. But that blue-collar worker narrative still exists. Unions are still a thing, but it's an interesting perspective on what it means to be a blue-collar guy who's just trying to get us some money so we can enjoy the finer things in life. Which is funny, and I can understand how when you're in the thick of it, that's something that you would do to justify that, because it sounds like not just Karen who feels that way. Mickey probably uses a similar kind of conversation. I'm sure they all do. And like belonging to this family, we do these things all together, and we always see each other, and we're all together. It's so normal for us. But I thought it was interesting how unions kind of run through the whole time. And I talked about this last night when I fell into my rabbit hole of let's look up all the crime families. Some of those crime families are better organized. In fact, organized crime is a strong word. I don't think it fully encapsulates just how organized crime is in North America based on the things I was looking into. And not just the Italian mob, but the mob in general. Are we going to get hit? Is there going to be a hit on us for this podcast? Kidding. Everything I found was on Wikipedia. But this kind of conversation and this organization of so in the Italian, for example, in the States, they have the 5 main crime families, right? The 5 families. And they all report to, I think it's the council or whatever that general overseeing body is, right? To help make sure that we keep the organized crime happening, but we don't step on each other's toes, and everybody has their own territory. And some of those are better organized than some governments and some corporate jobs I've worked.
Yes, you're not wrong. And that is, it's interesting that, and you talk about the union with that as well. I don't know the history of organized crime super duper well.
Clearly I do. I learned it all yesterday.
But it seems to me, anytime that I've seen a movie or watched a TV show or even seen a news story that has to do with it, that organized crime it seems to be an organizational mix where it started out very much like a monarchy would have, where it's blood related and it's people that are in a position of power that continue to pass power down through their own family. But at the point where this movie's happening in the 50s, I feel like it almost did the thing where it learned from constitutional organizations like unions that empowered people to have a structure for safeties and protections of them. And they incorporated that into the way an organized crime family does things, because you can make someone. Tommy DeVito can be made even though he's not a blood relative, but he is pure Sicilian. They can track his,
everybody back to the old country is the line. Yeah.
So they can do that, and they can make someone into the organization by that. But they also have everybody underneath that is, even when they talk about robbing some of the airports, that they would just rob the airport and it wasn't a big deal. And if anybody made a stink about it, I know the union boss, and they went on strike and scared them so badly that they didn't complain again. Like, that's a very coordinated attack that is probably, where, an organized crime family that maybe started out looking like a monarchy now has become like a union.
Well, that was the organized crime families are unions in and of themselves, right? Mm-hmm. You have a grievance. I mean, you shoot the guy, but you have a complaint, you put in a grievance, something gets done, right? Mm-hmm. And everyone falls back in line and you have protections. So Paulie is the overseer of not just the unions and protecting people within that, but also his own kind of union, right? Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting, again, I think the narrative for me and the connection between blue collar and the organized crime is not, they obviously make substantially more money through crime than you would through blue collar union work, but can organized crime exist because people are, I'm going to say desperate, but that's maybe an unfair word, because people feel they've gotten a bum handout, right? Mm-hmm. And so if there weren't so many unhappy dudes on the union side, for example, mm-hmm. who feel like they got shafted and should have gotten more money or should have this or that or the other thing, if that didn't exist, organized crime doesn't exist, mm-hmm. right? If you don't have people looking for protection, there's nobody to do the protecting.
Yeah.
And so it's similar to me the way, if the job sites are safe and everything is fair, and I'm thinking Industrial Revolution sort of onwards, but even now, if everything in the workplace and capitalism is working the way it's supposed to and it's all fair and safe, unions don't have to exist. Mm-hmm. And so it's just this really interesting dichotomy they set up, and I don't know, I won't say he didn't do it on purpose because he's Martin Scorsese, so he did, but it's not hammered home like, mm-hmm. this is what we're talking about, but there's just this kind of equation of these guys are getting their hands dirty because they're just blue collar guys. Yeah. So this equation of blue collar and crime family I thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. But I'm sorry, I don't know. My whole family worked for either healthcare or mining. None of the union dudes I know ever dug a hole to pull a body up 6 months later.
Yeah, I come from a family full of teachers, and if anybody has bodies buried...
They're metaphorical.
We have some questions about the education system in Canada. Specifically the teachers.
Yeah, a lot of teachers in your family. A lot of mining union guys in mine, and healthcare worker women in mine as well. Mm-hmm. And I have some questions about all the systems, if that's the case. So yeah, I don't know that there's much more to go down on that particular rabbit hole, but I thought it was it's a strong juxtaposition and an interesting equation of the two. Yeah. Not something I'd ever really thought about before. Mm-hmm. So, here's a fun one. What's the right way to do things? So, there's because we talk about if you have a complaint, you put in a grievance. Mm-hmm. There's a strong emphasis on there is the right way to do crime, basically. Mm-hmm. And there's a way we do things, and if you go outside of the way we do things, thanks for coming to our TED Talk. Mm-hmm. And I think the one that I see it in the strongest is Tommy. Because Tommy's such a hothead. And there's a lot of interesting foreshadowing about Tommy in varying places. There's a lot of interesting foreshadowing in this movie. Mm-hmm. I actually have a note in here, just as a sidebar, where it says, I thought, I almost had you there, Henry. I thought you might fold under interrogation.
Oh, yeah. So this
in the funny.
From the famous, yeah.
And we'll come back to that because I have a lot of thoughts about what that looks like.
Yeah.
Tommy does things that aren't okay. Yeah. And I think for a while he gets away with it because the other two dodos are going along with it. Mm-hmm. But also, they help him cover a shit up or whatever. Yeah. Fine. But he's also full-blooded Sicilian, and so do they allow that to happen for an amount of time because, oh, it's just Tommy, it's fine.
Yeah.
But there's a right way to do things. And I think even Polly's conversation with Henry about don't get involved in the drugs is part of that, right? We will shoot dudes and bury them in holes, but what we won't do are these things. This is off limits. You need to have... If you want to kill a made man, and I think this is the one where it kind of stuck for me, is if you want to take out a made man, you have to have a sit-down about it.
Yeah.
There's not a sit-down about killing a whole bunch of other people.
Correct.
But there's a sit-down about this.
Yeah.
And it's a one-on-one. You have to go, you come to me on this, the day of my... No. Like, you have to go to them and sit and have a conversation about why this needs to happen. And then you either get approval or you don't. And if you don't get approval, it's implied, well, you're the one who's going. Thanks for coming to our TED Talk. So it's just an interesting... rules of crime families, I guess?
Yeah, it's like when you talk about the rules of war, like waging war as gentlemen, as, used to be the way of doing it maybe prior to World War I, when trench warfare became a thing, and I think a lot of the rules and technology and artillery started to really gray a lot of those lines. And
let's not talk about it now.
No. We can probably find a war movie at some point in time to do for an episode, or we can deal more with war. But part of, I think, the rules that they talk about of doing the right thing, I think some of them are just the way that the family is structured, the way things are, the value of someone that is purely Sicilian as opposed to others probably has something to do with it. In the case of the drugs one, I feel like they really want people to stay away from drugs, because at that point in time, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into, I guess, the very early 80s when the film ends, drugs were the biggest. The war on drugs in the U.S. was a real big deal. And that was where the U.S. government spent a huge, astronomical amount of money over decades to clean up America and get drugs off the streets and this and that. And the mafia for a long time didn't want anything to do with drugs, because they knew that there was so many federal eyes on that whole organization, or the whole, like, cleaning it up, that if they got involved with it and they got implicated, their whole house of cards was coming down.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of structure to, well, we do this in a gentlemanly way, or this is the proper way to do it. And also a little bit of, we can steal, scotch from the Bamboo Lounge and sell it out the back, or run up credit on somebody's tab that owes us a favor, sell it for our profit, and we don't have to ever give it back to them, because we'll just burn the Bamboo Lounge down for the insurance money. There's no consequence there. That happens all the time. Like, insurance companies aren't going to investigate it, or they have people that are on insurance boards that will just block it, or they have people in unions that will block those things. There's not unions for drugs, right?
Right.
There's no protection there. It's just they want it off the street. They're going to get it out of there, and they're going to bring down anybody that is running it on the streets. So they know the crimes that they can get away with, and they operate within it. And when Henry does get involved with it while he's in prison, Paulie doesn't get upset with him when it's happening. He doesn't talk to him when it's happening. He knows it's happening because he's very benevolent and knows what he's doing. But after Henry gets out of jail and Paulie gets out of jail, he tells him, he says, I need you to get away from the junk.
Yeah, I know you did what you had to do while you were in prison, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like, everything's unlawful. It's what a terrible time they had in prison. No, I think part of when I talk about the right way to do things, or, where you sort of feel like, oh, that's just... So Bruce. Bruce. The guy who lives across the street from Karen's parents. Who... With
the hot red Camaro.
What a guy. You get the impression he's also Jewish? That's kind of the...
I think so. They see him at the, country club they're hanging out with at one point, so probably I would think Jewish. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's not involved in the crime family at all. But he decides that Karen's gonna show him a good time. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure why she's in the Camaro at first, to be honest. I think maybe she's getting a ride home or whatever. But anyway, he gets handsy. She calls Henry. And he goes over there and smashes his face in with a gun in his hand. Mm-hmm. And you kind of feel like it's a weird feeling, especially maybe as a woman, but you understand why Karen finds him so attractive. Mm-hmm. And she says other women, including my best friends, would have gotten the heck away at that point, but I was actually turned on because he brings a gun to her and says, hide it. And there's a little part of you that's like, yeah, I get that. Because also, he was a creep. Bruce deserved to have his face beaten in.
Yeah.
Fuck that guy. So, and that almost is like, oh, that's a real thing, right? Like, that's the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, this movie does a good job of not painting anybody as, there's no Voldemort in Goodfellas.
He who shall not be named. Thank you.
There is no one true evil at any point in time. Everybody has shades. Even
it's true.
Tommy, who is wild and crazy and does a lot of the wrong things, has good moments and is personable and, has these wonderful, lovely talks with his mother. And, there's redeeming qualities in bits for everyone, and there's irredeemable qualities for bits in everyone. It's not black and white.
Yeah, which is, I think, an accurate portrayal of humans in general. Now, that said, we're not all going out and shooting at some kid's foot to make him dance like the Oklahoma Kid. I don't know anybody who's ever done that in real life, thank God. Mm-hmm. But we all have parts that are great, not great. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. It's a kind of a full picture as opposed to other things we may have seen where crime is just crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think maybe that's kind of where that all ties into the union and the family and the things for me, right? What do you do to protect your own?
Yeah.
What do you do to get what you need to get? Mm-hmm. And as people get more desperate, and I think we're seeing that even now, right? What will people do? Mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting the world's turning to organized crime, but, well, maybe I am in other ways. But I'm not suggesting we're all about to start, getting in bed with the mafia. But
yeah,
it's a really good depiction of human nature. And when the system is fucked, what happens?
Yeah.
So, anyway. So yes, what is the right way, or doing the right thing, I think, which is, Do the Right Thing is a different, excellent movie that we won't talk about on this podcast because we've seen together, but...
Yes.
Okay. Food. I have another really big one.
Yep.
I have several other really big ones.
Yep.
But I want to talk about the food. Because, I have minimum 2 of my dearest, closest, best friends on the planet who are Italian.
Yeah.
And a third who is honorary Italian. And I believe at one point the mother of one of those gals referred to all of the rest of us as honorary Italians because, boy, can I eat pasta.
Yeah.
But food is such an important part of people's life. Mm-hmm. And food is often this, thing that brings people together. And there's moments like Polly's saying, okay, well, now we can eat. Like, let's eat. Mm-hmm. When everybody's at the house. Because they're all together for meals, right? It's the gathering place. Even when they're in jail and Polly is using a razor blade to slice the thinnest pieces of garlic I've ever seen. Which, do you feel bad about that? Did that make you miss garlic?
Yeah. I can't eat garlic. I have to eat low FODMAP now, which is really sad for that. But
people who don't know this are learning all sorts of things about us on this podcast, aren't they?
Yeah.
There's just this really interesting thread. Maybe not in the very early days. Henry doesn't talk a lot about food other than Tootie's Pizzeria, which, is there.
Yeah,
is
it's more of a place than a
food.
Culinary delight, yeah.
But all the way through to the end when his brother spent the day watching helicopters and sauce.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? And for somebody like Henry to say, I have to come back to the gravy.
Yeah.
Which seems like a word that isn't necessarily something he would have used in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Although his mom probably did, because again, full Sicilian. So it's this food is the thing that brings people together, and food is the thing that matters. And so when he's in prison, he's got that bag. It's like, I got cheese, which I was like, okay, well, now we can eat.
Yeah.
No, it was
Salami,
the wine.
prosciutto, wine, scotch, like anything when they're in jail, they talk about jail being different for people in the family, where they've got steaks and lobster and, making meatballs with pork and veal and beef, and like, it's different for them, but like that's a big thing for them, and they're doing something like not just chopping garlic, but slicing it so thin with a razor blade that it's going to just dissipate in the oil to get a better taste. Like, they're in what most people would deem as the worst situation you could be in, and their focus is slicing the garlic so thin that it makes our pasta taste unbelievable. Like, you're right, that's it's definitely an Italian thing, because that is where family comes together, and you have a big family style dinner at a huge table, like they have many times in the movie. Yeah, I forget every time I watch this movie how hungry I get.
Yeah, I wanted to eat, but we watched this so late that, food at 1, I wasn't about to start a pasta sauce at 1 in the morning or what have you, so I would have been I've done weirder things, but I don't know that there's much to be said about the food. It's not like it's its own character necessarily, but it is the thing that people gather over in general.
Yep.
I think in the movie and outside of it, that's kind of an experience most of us have had.
Yeah.
Certainly an experience I've had, and there was a part of me that wanted to text the girls and be like, hello, hi, let's talk about pasta.
Yeah.
And even now, so I have ADHD, and as part of that, I will get stuck on hyperfixation meals, as we've discussed. So if I'll go for a couple of weeks of eating the same thing over and over, then decide I can't eat it for 6 months, and then it'll come back into the rotation eventually.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been doing a lot lately, and I was like, maybe I was preparing for Goodfellas and didn't even know, was prosciutto wrapped cheese that's then crisped up with a little bit of, balsamic if it's there. And I've definitely sent pictures of that to the girls. And so there's a part of it where I was like, it all comes back.
Yeah.
But yeah, the food looks really good. I'm very jealous.
Yeah.
I would like somebody to make me fresh pasta now.
And
with gluten-free flour. What?
Yes. Yeah, I need to do that too. Welcome to Dietary Needs with Matt and Jess.
Let's discuss our food choices.
The food also does tie into some things with family that is Italian, definitely, but this is a lot of other cultures, and actually your Ukrainian family also would absolutely do the same thing. When they end up going to Tommy's mother's house, when they have the dead guy in the back of their truck, or the trunk of their car,
and he's not quite dead,
and they need a shovel to go and finish the job, and they said, let's go to my mother's and pick up a shovel, and they're trying to sneak in really quietly because his mom's asleep, and she's not. She wakes up and turns the lights on, and she's there, and she's, I haven't seen you in such a long time. Come and sit down. Let me get you some food. I'll make you some this. And it's like when you see family, it's like, we'll get some food and we'll sit down and we'll talk and we'll have a nice time. Like that. That's also where a lot of the food stuff comes in.
Yeah, I actually have a note that says, so we just murder a dude and then casually have a snack with Tommy's ma.
Yeah.
That's normal.
With blood on his shirt that he just explains away of hitting a deer.
Yeah.
I'll bring this up now because this is probably the right segue of it. I was going to mention Tommy's mom.
Oh, this is probably appropriate, yeah.
Tommy's mom is Martin Scorsese's mom.
Oh, cute.
And she's not an actor.
Even cuter. I love that.
And she very famously is the subject, her and Marty's dad are famously the subjects of his first kind of documentary, Italian American. And she is like, I'm not sure how much they actually scripted her lines because I feel like they're so natural out of her. But also having watched Italian American, that's just her. That's how she talks. She just really why do you never call? Why don't you settle down with a nice girl? Just this stream of consciousness of blah, 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 whatever. Like there's a hilarious line in Italian American where she thinks Marty's turned off the camera. And she just is talking like she's not on the documentary now. But like, what do? You come into the house and it's fine. I want to do this, but like, you're so demanding. I can't do blah, blah, blah. And then she notices he's still holding the camera sort of by his side. She says, are you still recording? He says, yeah. She goes, you'll never leave this house alive. Like the snappiest thing. So I think that's just who she is. And I don't know how much of she was reading a script because it's so natural. But it also is like, that's family. He put so much of his own experience into the movie, including putting his own mother into it, which is kind of wonderful. She is a shining beacon of light.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love her. I just love the please stop painting religious things, and she's got like a Mona Lisa like thing she's doing. And then the dogs, I like it because there's dogs that are going opposite directions. One's going east and one's going west. And then there's this guy just being like, the fuck am I doing here?
Yeah.
Like, it's so it really evokes everything I've ever, and I don't think this is specific to an Italian American family necessarily, because I have a lot of friends who have had similar conversations with their mothers. Yeah. From a variety of cultures and places. Mm-hmm. And so is it just moms? But yeah, it was just really cute. I love, and she doesn't question. Mm-hmm. So, I will tell you that if we showed up at my mom's house and you had blood on your shirt, she'd ask more questions than, what happened? Well, I hit a deer, but there's no sign of it. I have to go cut it off, though. Can I have this big ass knife?
Can I have your carving knife? I need to hack off the rest of the deer hoof.
Yeah, just bring it back
from the grill of my car.
Or if we're like comparative, like if it had been Graham, if we're going that kind of, like, my grandmother would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? So the fact that his mom is just like, all right, yeah, okay, just bring it back. But yeah, his mom, 10 out of 10. So, I don't really have anything else to say on that one, just that his mom's great.
So great.
This leads me into my other point, which is the women in this movie. Mm-hmm. Because, oh boy, howdy. Not only is Karen one half of the voiceover, but, and this, I think it kind of goes hand in hand. I have the women and I have toxic masculinity, and I think they play really well together, obviously. Yeah. But if we talk specifically about the women before we lead into because something funny about toxic masculinity and humor I want to get to. Haha, something funny. The women are interesting characters. And they're given actual identities, but not lives outside of their husbands. Tommy's mom has a life, arguably outside of her husband, because it's implied, I think, that he's deceased. You don't ever see him. You don't know anything. You don't really know anything about him, but the understanding would be probably that he was involved. And Tommy's mom seems to know what Tommy's up to. Yeah. The day he's supposed to be made, she knows. She knows. She says, be safe. Like, she understands. So, my kind of pull from that is Tommy's dad probably involved as well. Because why otherwise would this child at 13, I think Henry talks about, be involved, right? I do have a fun sidebar about the kids on this one. Yeah. When there's two different points where there's fire, but there's one where they're blowing up the cars when he's a kid. When Henry does, yeah. And they're setting the cars on fire, and it's that, like, cool guy walk away from burning building, but it's actually Henry just, like, leaping and running because he's still a kid. Yeah. So I thought that was really funny, versus when he and Tommy are talking about the double date, well, the tiki bar is literally burning down behind them, and how funny that is. Yeah. And maybe this is actually me leading into the men, so we'll come back to that. The women. Karen does not have an existence outside of Henry. To the point that she goes completely batshit off the rails and goes to the apartment that he has one of his mistresses in. Janice. And then Janice disappears because he's got Sandy. Why not? But, like, the one girlfriend. And it's funny to see how normalized that is for them, because, like, the whole family goes to the house and then they go to the apartment, right? Like, Jimmy and Polly and Tommy and everybody goes. So, weird. 0 out of 10. But Karen's whole thing is how much she loves Henry. Yeah. And what she would do for her family. By that I mean, like, her husband and her 2 children. But also her mom talks about when they're waiting for him to come home just after they've been married, and Henry doesn't come home all night. And her mom loses her mom. He's not Jewish, and your father would have never. And she's like, well, your dad's never been allowed to leave the house. But it's this, like, beleaguered mom feeling. or the gathering of the women, and this was a really interesting one for me, as Karen says, we had the hostess party at Mickey's, and they all wear too much makeup, and they all have bad skin, and they all look bad, so to speak, which is different than we think about the mob wife aesthetic, right? Because we talk a lot about, they have the money, and therefore they can afford the things, but really, it might look pretty on the exterior, but it's not when you get down into it, and how the women all kind of stick together, but it's, we have to hold down the fort at home so our blue-collar men can do the things that we need them to do. And the women aren't really afforded the ability to be complete humans.
Yeah.
They're there to take care of the family, to never get divorced, to use the money for what have you. And so the one time we see Karen making her own decision, not the one time, she makes other decisions, but I think she makes a decision that affects business is when she flushes all of the coke.
When they're getting raided.
And he loses his fucking mind and is like, how could you have done that? They would never have found it. They would have found it.
Yeah.
There's no question in my mind the police would have found that. She did the right thing. Yeah. But now they're out $60K, so that's a lot of money. Even now. But in $1980, whew.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are archetypes that you see carried over into other mafia movies, other sort of pop culture of the women. And it's easy to see how that started. Because again, even Tommy's mom, she knows. And all these women know. Yeah. And Mickey talks about poor so-and-so whose son died and he just pulls a gun out at a card game and the accidentally goes off and this kid gets shot and now he's gone and this kid's gone and the grandfather has a heart attack and her husband's in jail. Yeah. And everyone talks about that like it's such a normal thing. Yeah. Poor Karen's like, what the hell did I marry into? Surprise, she gets just as involved. It's how normalized that becomes. Yeah. And there's something to be said about the like network of women, which I think is something I could talk about endlessly and fascinating for the rest of my days. That's right, endlessly and fascinating. I could talk about the structures of women supporting women because I think that is what's happening here. Yeah. But the women are very much treated like, and of course it's also a product of the time, it's the 50s and the 60s. The women are not ever given the opportunity to participate in the business. Yeah. Whether they want to or not remains to be seen, but there are no women involved in the family as far as the high up stuff. The women do not have other jobs. Their job is wife, mother, don't ask questions. Yep.
Yeah, and that, I think you hit on a lot of the things that are at play there completely with having, there's some societal things there where there's expectancy of raising the children and keeping the home and that sort of thing, which are alive and well from the 50s, even going into the 80s. There's still a lot of lingering bits of that. And interestingly, when you get to towards the end of the film, Karen is the one woman you do see have some agency in it when Henry gets into the cocaine and the drug stuff with the people from Pittsburgh that he's getting cocaine from. And not only is Karen involved,
but
Lois, their former babysitter, is involved. His mistress, Sandy, she's the one actually cutting the cocaine and snorting enough of it that's probably a very large problem for her. But Henry's the one that is there and has women involved with what he's doing. You never see any of the other wives, any of the other girlfriends, any of the other women in the film getting involved with any of the illegal activity. You maybe see them benefiting from it, whether it's wearing a new mink coat or having a new pink Cadillac or whatever. Yeah,
those not actually benefits.
No, not in the long run. But they in around Henry's circle, he does have women involved with it, and I don't know if that's a comment on him not being full-blooded Sicilian and not fully understanding, and thus he plays by a slightly different set of rules than everybody else. It'd be interesting to know if that's the case with Jimmy and Mickey, because he's also not full-blooded Sicilian.
Yeah, you don't really get that.
No, but that's the only time you do see women in a position to contribute to, quote unquote, the organization.
Yeah,
and it's not as a whole, it's just more Henry's little ring.
Is Henry progressive in his criminal activities by involving women, or is Henry desperate?
Probably desperate, because that's, his slide to desperation starts when he's in jail, which is arguably the most desperate time in any convict's life.
In any young criminal's life. Yeah, I would. I don't actually think he is, but it's funny to go, is Henry actually a progressive man?
Yeah.
Given how he treats his wife and all the other women, I'm going no, but...
Yeah.
Which, wasn't that a fun way to lead into my next thought? Holy toxic masculinity, bad man.
Settle in.
Now, keeping in mind that this movie takes place in the mid to late 50s all the way through into 1980, which... When you get the screen card telling you it's 1980, I've written, and this is not a point, I just love that it happens. There's a moment, it opens with somebody snorting coke, and I was like, well, that's appropriate for the 80s. There's also a note in here where they're going to the zoo to get rid of somebody in Miami, and I've written, oh, the zoo, that's normal. Some of my notes are just my inside thoughts, so you all get to hear them now. But it's very much a patriarchy, whether it's a union or not. And at the point in which this movie is set, and really the whole story and its actuality is set, the 50s in particular, and into the early 60s, I'd argue. And then you start to get second wave feminism, etc., and Betty Friedan and the feminine mystique and how Mama's Little Helpers and all that sort of thing, which... I kind of wonder if Karen's cocaine addiction is her version of that. Sandy's is not. Sandy's got some other problems. But the time in which this is set is very much women stay home, right? Women they're not allowed to have jobs because they had it during World War II, but that was only out of necessity.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to have them now because women want to work. Wild. Which, honestly, I love that I can work, but there's a part of me that's like, man, I wish I didn't have to. So
thanks for that pressure.
You're welcome. I mean, I wish we all didn't have to sometimes, but that's a whole other... my feelings on capitalism is for another day.
Maybe this podcast will take off and this can be our job. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Smash that like button. I hate that I just said that out loud. Also, no one's paying me just to talk. Moving on. It is very much set in a cultural time, a socioeconomic period in which toxic masculinity is having a super fun resurgence, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know that it ever went away. I'm not suggesting it wasn't there, but in the attempt to return America to what it was pre-World War II. Yeah. And without, taking into account the Great Depression and things, but this attempt to return to the nuclear family, and we have this economic boom now, and we have plastic, and we have all these things like refrigerators and appliances that are going to help make our lives easier. Like, at one point, Henry tells Sandy, this place is a mess and it shouldn't be, I bought you a dishwasher. Yeah. Right? All of these things are happening, and there's this kind of insane amount of change. And I've said this before in conversation, and I've said it in this podcast. When things are in a period of flux, people go back to what's familiar because they try to find comfort. And what was familiar or should have been comfortable, quote unquote, is this kind of patriarchal dominance. But the fragile masculinity in this movie is so aggressive. Yes. That people don't just get mad. It's very red pill, like, podcast bros. Sorry, we're coming for you, podcast bros. But I'm seeing it even now. A lot of that is this, the women aren't allowed to have opinions and whatever, and you can't question a dude because if you do, he comes to violence. Yes. And I think that's maybe the violence in this movie, for me, is it's not egregious. And I don't know that even in 1990 it would have been egregious.
There's a few scenes, but not anything that hadn't been on screen before.
Right. It's uncomfortable to watch, but it's not gory. It's not so in your face that you feel unwell. When they dig up the 6-month-old dead guy, there's a sentence. You don't see any of that stuff. You just see Henry vomiting and like the backlight of the red, which I'm assuming is a headlight at that point.
Tail light, yeah.
Yeah, which is fair and gross all at the same time, but you don't have to see that.
Yeah, there's only a couple of times where you do see it. One where they splatter Stax's brains all over his bed. And I guess the other one that you see but you don't really see is when Tommy gets shot. When he's face down and the shot stays on him and the blood just pools out. You see the blood, but you don't see, like, detailed gore.
Yeah, the bits of Tommy's face that's no longer there.
Yeah.
Because that's done on purpose so his mom can't have an open casket. Anyway, or even, like, for me is, when I talk about the violence, I have less of a problem, which says a lot about where we've come, I think, with the shots than I do with the beatings.
Yes.
That I have a harder time with. I feel grosser about that. Because you're watching them bash somebody's head in, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But how quickly things jump from, oh, we're all just playing poker, or we're all just having a drink, or everybody calm down, we're all just hanging out, to there's been the smallest perceived slight to who I am as a man and my masculinity. And so now I must prove it by jumping to violence.
This is why the scene we alluded to earlier, the very famous scene in the Bamboo Lounge, the "What do you mean I'm funny" scene. That is why that scene is so well known, so well acted. Essentially, it's the reason Joe Pesci won the Oscar, is his performance in that one, where he goes from telling, like, being the center of telling a funny story, and after the punchline has happened, after everyone is laughing hysterically, Henry tells him, he goes, you are a funny guy, like, just as a tossed off. And Tommy switches, like, his incel brain switches to, like, what do you mean I'm funny? And it slowly gets there. And he's messing with him. But the only reason Tommy can mess with him is because you see right after that, when the guy who owns the place comes up and asks him to sign the bill, and he says, put on my tab. He says, well, you owe me $7,000. Will you embarrass me in front of my friends? And breaks a champagne bottle over his head. So, like, Tommy, that earlier one is like, oh, isn't it a funny joke? He thought I was making fun of him. Ha, ha, ha. No, you may fall under questioning. And then every other time you see it, because it happens then, it happens at the poker game when he shoots Spider in the foot accidentally. It happens when they end up killing the maid guy at Henry's bar. It's all the, like, tiniest little slight, him taking it slightly personally and not being able to get over it.
Yeah, and I think, Tommy is the epitome of the toxic masculinity, and there is something that I'll come back to because you talked about the funny, and I kind of want to tie into that really quick, but it's kind of my last big point, I think. But Jimmy is too.
Yeah.
But Jimmy is in a different way. So when you look at what it means to be a man in this sort of scenario, and our three main dudes, for lack of a better term, we have Jimmy, we have Tommy, we have Henry. Henry's obviously the one telling the story. Polly is as well, but you never get the feeling that Polly feels threatened, because he's the one running the whole fucking thing. So what are they going to do to him?
He doesn't have to talk to anybody.
No.
Might talk to 6 people.
And he doesn't have a phone. He don't want to have a phone. Other people have to run all day to get his calls.
Yeah.
Polly. Tommy is hinged, as I've alluded to. He's hinged, all right. So Tommy's deeply unhinged and is a wild card for a reason. And talk about his slights and how that plays in. Jimmy for me is the sort of old world, like, it's all fine, everything's fine, and he'll let things go unless it pertains to his livelihood. Jimmy is I don't want to share.
Yeah.
Unless it's with, I think, his 2 besties. for lack of a better term. Because he does give Henry the money after the Lufthansa? Lufthansa?
Yeah.
Holy smokes, that was tough this morning. After the heist, he's knocking people off.
Yeah.
And it's ostensibly made out to be because he doesn't want anything to get linked back to him. But it's because he doesn't want to share.
He doesn't want to pay him.
He doesn't want to pay them. He doesn't want to pay any of them. And he doesn't want them buying things with the money they do have because, he doesn't want that to get... He doesn't want them spending the money.
Yeah.
Because he wants it for himself. And Henry is sort of the control side of that for me. The way he flips the switch on Karen on more than one occasion. And I have a note where I'm like, cool, Henry, throw a lamp and then gas lamp your wife. That's nice. Because he does.
Yeah.
Or, he beats the wall and all these other kind of crazy things. So for Henry, it's violence. It's violence, but it's against his wife and predominantly. And in other places. And I think he loves her in his own way, I do. But there's other stuff going on.
Yeah.
So Henry is kind of that behind closed doors. That's where he feels like that could be his masculinity could be threatened, and there we are. For Jimmy, it's the I don't share.
Yeah.
And for Tommy, it's the you're making fun of me.
Yeah, and Tommy's an interesting one, and I half jokingly use the phrase incel in talking about Tommy. Tommy doesn't ever get married.
Nope.
And, there's he is on dates with different women. I mean, Karen and Henry meet because they are the other half of a double date where Tommy wants to go on a date with Karen's friend who is afraid to go on dates with an Italian man alone. My God, what's the world coming to? Like, so prejudice against Italians.
Can you imagine?
But he doesn't ever get married. It doesn't ever appear like he has a serious relationship. He, has different women with him at different times, but there's never a point like there's a definite point to say, Jimmy and Mickey, they are married, they are together, they go everywhere together, they go to the family functions together. There's never a Tommy and.
No.
It's just Tommy. And he'd be an interesting character to kind of dive into there because you can read into that a lot of different ways. It can be a very, what in the modern terms you would call an incel, of someone that gets disillusioned with women and thus hates women and thus is aggressive and potentially violent against women. It may also, in that point in time, be a potential response for someone that is closeted homosexual. And they don't want to, they're protecting themselves from being found out as being homosexual in and amongst a group of people that are hyper masculine, hyper conservative, old world values sort of thing. And we don't, that's not necessarily me projecting is Tommy gay on Tommy. We just don't know. But the prevailing attitude could go either way of maybe he just really has a deep resentment of women despite him having a good relationship with his mother, or maybe he's hiding something else.
Does he have a deep resentment because he has a good relationship with his mother?
No, that's Psycho. That's a different movie.
Oh, my bad. I got it wrong. The other thing I think that kind of ties in the women and Henry, and as far as his exerting his own masculinity, whatever that looks like, is the way he makes Karen crazy. And there is a moment in my notes where I've written, all right, Karen, stop throwing bread. Because she shows up at the jail and makes a scene. And you're not made to feel any empathy for this woman when she loses her mind, right? When she goes and starts yelling at Janice and says, he's my husband. He's a real catch, Sweet Peanut. But she takes her children there.
Yes.
She takes her children to the mistress's apartment and starts hitting all the things and threatens to call the super and all these other bits and bobs. And her rage is at the other woman, not at her husband for what he's done to her. It does become that. And then she threatens him with a gun. He talks her down and then proceeds to, be violent with her. That, I think, is the more uncomfortable part for me. So, yeah, the gaslighting with Henry's real strong across the board on all of the women he encounters. But for me, he's the only one we see. It's not the only one we see necessarily, but he talks about Saturdays for the wives, Fridays for the girlfriends.
Yeah.
Right? And he's the one that we see predominantly with the girlfriend. He has the girlfriend who's in their own apartment with Janice. And then the kids get dragged there. Those poor children saw so much shit. And then he has Sandy, who's involved in the stuff, but also is a girlfriend.
Yeah.
Debbie Mazur, shout out. Love her. But same, right? And so they cut to a couple of Friday nights. And I think Jimmy's got his arm around the back of a chair of someone or what have you. And Tommy's got a different woman every time. But Henry is the only one we see having this very clear...
Yeah.
This is the girlfriend, this is the wife.
Yeah. Long term as well.
Yeah. Which is an interesting... So just that's kind of his brand of misogyny as opposed to the other two. Yeah. Where I'm sure there's misogyny. And there is. Jimmy, like... So when Karen is I asked you about this last night, and this might not be related, but when Karen shows up to ask Jimmy for help... Yeah. And he sends her down to, there's some beautiful Dior dresses down there. Go get something for your mother. Yeah. What the heck does she see?
So there's two dudes that look like they're moving a box. And it's pretty quiet, but then when she peeks around and sort of looks, and then she looks back at Jimmy and he's saying, yeah, in there. You can hear the two men going, just something really, really quiet like, wait, someone's looking at us? I don't know that she sees anything bad.
Yeah, I didn't get that feeling.
But it comes right after she's had a conversation with Henry about, she's saying, like, I think you sniffed too much coke. I think they're right. I think you're paranoid. Well, she's been shown also sniffing just as much coke. Just as much. Probably that. And this comes right afterwards. When he is confided into her, he's like, I think Jimmy's going to have me killed when I go to Florida to go take care of somebody else. And that's when she says, I think you're paranoid. And she goes to get some help. And he asks, like, how's Henry doing? I blah, blah, blah. And he then says, oh, there's some dresses down there, just in this way. And wherever he is apparently directing her, he's like lingering and watching. No, it's further down. No, it's there. Like, he's very intently watching her. And she looks in and sees something suspicious and looks back. And he's like, no, go in there. Now she's paranoid. And now that's been put in her head. So I don't think she sees anything specific. I just think that's the moment when, and right afterwards, they go to the witness protection guy. Like, I think that's the point where she's like, no, I think you're paranoid. It's the drugs. And then she lives it for real and goes, no, we need to get out of this. Yeah.
And that was because Jimmy and Polly, for example, both at points are like, you gotta go home. You gotta go back to your wife. We know you're living with the girlfriend here and that's fine. But the wives are the most important. And Polly's like, I'll settle it with Karen. Don't worry. She'll never divorce you. She'd kill you, but she'd never divorce you. Like, they seem to have a weird... respect is the wrong word here. Almost reverence for the idea of you're married to this woman and therefore you're like, marriage is marriage for life, one way or the other. Yeah.
Strong Roman Catholic.
Woohoo! Yeah, good times. We'll come back to that. Not today ever, but enough said. However, Jimmy doesn't seem, and we don't see him with Mickey other than what we're seeing, right? Yeah. So we don't know what happens behind closed doors, but I don't get the impression that he or Polly are necessarily as violent with their wives as Henry is with his. And they maybe are, because they're both clearly dangerous men. Yeah. Right? There's no two ways about it. So that scene where I wasn't sure what was happening, because is this Jimmy trying to off Karen? Or is this Jimmy actually trying to do something and it just spooks her because fear? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the idea. Like, Karen at that point fully understands the world Henry's in. She fully understands who Jimmy is. She fully understands all of the things that are going on, the risks they'd taken with the drugs, and it, like, she never really was at any point in a threatening situation where, like, oh, I might lose my life because of this, until that point. And she may not have been in a threatening situation. It may just have been, oh, those are just two guys that are moving things for Jimmy, and they're just being like, oh, somebody's here. And she would go in and go, no, they might even recognize her. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's just that situation that finally hits home for her to go, like, I could turn around any corner and be dead tomorrow.
Yeah, this could be the end of me. Interesting. So, my last and perhaps most important point is humor. On the one hand, things that made me laugh. Like, there's a throwaway line when everybody's getting arrested and someone says, the guys who sold you those suits had a real good sense of humor, which is easily one of my favorite lines in this whole movie. But the idea that threats are hidden in humor. So we've already talked about it a little bit, but that whole, oh, you think I'm funny? Like I'm a clown? Like I amuse you? See, I said I was going to have terrible accents again. It's like, oh, I'm pulling your leg, Henry. But is he really?
Yeah.
Or does he just get to that point because he realizes, Tommy realizes he's gone too far. Right? It's almost like he masks the threat in humor. And when he realizes that perhaps he's threatening the wrong person, and it's his, like, almost lifelong friend, really, in the grand scheme.
Yeah.
And he is a funny dude. Or the way he's telling this story is very funny. He doesn't own that. It's like being funny is a bad thing.
Yeah.
Which, heaven help me if that's the case. I'm straight up out of luck if being funny is a bad thing. I'll be here all week.
Yeah.
Right?
And in that specific interaction, he does own it at the end. He just say, I had him going. I had him going. Like, he is in that moment putting on a show for all of his friends at the table. And in that case, he's almost doing crowd work, for lack of a better term, as a stand-up comedian. But he's also telling a story about getting beat up by a cop after he got arrested and fell asleep somewhere after, like, and he's
resting in the weeds.
And a cop pulling him in, and him getting beat up by the cop because he told him to go fuck his mother. And then he woke up and the cop's still there, and he says, you got anything to say now? He says, what are you still doing here? I told you to go fuck your mother. Like, he is very clearly using humor as his own mechanism of saying nothing to a police officer while still being threatening. And then he does it to Henry live. So it's like it's a funny little meta thing. But that's not the only time it happens with Tommy.
Well, no, and that's so there are several points where humor is a trigger for Tommy. And the other guys seem like they let things go when it comes to jokes.
Yeah.
But also that none of them have jokes made about them at the same rate that Tommy does.
Yep.
Right? And maybe that's because Jimmy's so scary. Jimmy loses his mind when his money is threatened. And Henry, I think, when his sense of belonging to the family is threatened, when his ability to be involved. Tommy, it's when somebody questions him or makes him look foolish. So there's that. There's the thing that ends up being the cause of Tommy's death, which is Billy Batts joking around with him after he's gotten out of jail. And it's a celebration, and oh, Tommy's here, and go get your shoe shine box, kid.
Yeah.
And really, clearly Billy's been around for a dog's age. Like, he seems like he's done the prison thing once or 20 times.
Yeah.
And so this is like, he's out. Yay, great, cool. And he's a made man. You can't fuck with Billy.
Yeah.
But he does.
Yeah.
And Tommy's the one who goes batshit about it. Now, Jimmy doesn't take long to jump in.
No, Jimmy's in on it from the beginning, because when they're kicking Tommy out for getting there, he says to Jimmy, keep him here. It's one of the last things he says before he leaves. Yeah. And they get him drunk, and he's still there after everybody's left, and it's Henry and it's Jimmy. So Henry's complicit in that too. But, like, Jimmy is complicit in that cold and calculated way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tommy's a hothead. And Henry kind of feels like, yes, he's complicit, but also like he didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, Henry's a little more of an enabler than a active participant.
I think that's a good way of putting that. But it's Billy making a joke, and he's obviously doing it at Tommy's expense. Mm-hmm. And he's obviously doing it to make him feel small, but it's wrapped up in humor, mm-hmm. and it becomes a point where it's too far and Tommy kills him. Or bashes his face in, mm-hmm. puts him in a trunk, and that's where we open this movie. And they're going to go bury him, but he's not actually dead, so then he gets the carving knife from his mom and stabs him a bunch, and then we shoot him. Because why not? I think my note says, pretty sure he's dead now, guys.
I think they did it.
Mm-hmm. But he's a made man, and they didn't have a conversation. Mm-hmm. And if they had, he would have been told to get fucked, right?
Yeah.
They would never have said, yeah, you should definitely kill him for making a joke about you being a shoeshine boy.
Yeah, and it's, even though they don't specifically make a short joke,
it's about him being a little...
Short man syndrome, completely.
Yeah, short king.
Yeah, but... it you know, that's a super underlining thing there. And any, you know, Billy Batts is the one that really specifically, like, all he's saying is the guy used to shine people's shoes really well when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And then Tommy can't take that as a joke, and then all they do is just faux apologize and no, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. But you brought it up. Well, no, he can't let it go, and he can't let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I hate to use this phrase. It's a dog with a bone, right? Mm-hmm. He won't let it go. And it's just a joke. But for Tommy, it's not, right?
Yep.
And then we have the poker game.
Mm-hmm.
And the Oklahoma kid. And Tommy's the only one laughing when he shoots the kid in the foot.
Yeah.
He's the one making the joke about dance, get the drink here faster. He probably didn't say anything to Spider about getting a drink. But because he doesn't show up with the drink, suddenly that's an affront to Tommy.
Yeah.
And so to show this kid, to prove him, you know, teach him a lesson, there's the word, he shoots at his feet and accidentally shoots him in the foot. Mm-hmm. And it's like, Tommy, why would you do something like that? But it's an accident. It was just a joke that went to, it's just a joke. Mm-hmm. And Spider comes back with his big ass foot wrapped up to the poker game another night. Yeah. And then Jimmy makes a joke at Tommy's expense about Spider getting shot in the foot.
Well, it starts out with Tommy joking with Spider about him limping the drink over here. Yeah. And, you know, give us a couple of dance steps, won't you? And Spider works up the balls to then say, right, why don't you go fuck yourself, Tommy? And that's when everybody starts laughing and Jimmy starts making jokes towards Tommy. Tommy's not laughing. Tommy's taken aback initially and then sinks in. Everybody else is laughing and he's not. And Jimmy's going, like, good job. Like, he pays Spider extra money. He's like, good job, kid. Don't take no shit from nobody. And then turns to Tommy and says, what, are you just going to sit and take that? You, Tommy? You, as a joke.
Yeah. And really, the way to handle that would have been to laugh and go like, you know what? Good job, kid. You've got a future here, right? Yeah. Because that's the sort of shit I'm sure they all said at one point or another too. But instead, Tommy loses his fucking mind and kills the kid. Mm-hmm. I should find what my note specifically said. Because I think I was like, oh, okay, that happened. Yeah. It's Tommy being funny. Jimmy tells Henry to forget about tonight. And then they ice pick Maury. He had that whole thing. Yeah. Nah, don't worry about it. There's also a line about come on fuckos, which made me laugh. Yeah. But, yeah, this whole thing with Spider and the way that Tommy can't take a joke, right? And Jimmy knows, I think, making a joke at Tommy's expense will get him riled up. And they all know, everybody knows that Tommy is unhinged. I don't genuinely think in that moment that he knows that it's going to result in that kid getting killed. No. That's not how maybe getting shot in the other foot. Yeah.
They're among friends. It's Frankie Carbone and it's like all these people that this is our people. We're in a safe place.
Yeah, we all just hang out together and we play poker and the women hang out and this is what we're doing. And Tommy just loses it. And ultimately, Tommy's inability to take a joke or to let a joke go is what gets him killed. Yep.
It's also a very funny juxtaposition. And in this same scene, Tommy is like, this is probably Joe Pesci partly and the character partly. Joe Pesci as a person is he's just a funny dude in general. Like,
yes.
In anything he's in, he just has these great moments that only really great comedic actors can have. And that scene where he gets insulted by Spider, he shoots Spider, Henry runs up to Spider to check on him, and like everybody's super silent. Henry's like, he's dead. And Tommy goes, I mean, he got shot. What do you expect? Like, he can't help but just, he's like, I mean, he got shot. What were you expecting?
So it's funny you say that, because I thought he said, oh, it was a good shot.
No.
And I was like, I guess, yeah. No, oh, he got shot. What do you expect? Yeah, well, you shot him, and not once.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the other thing. Like, Maury, is it Jimmy who does Maury, or is it Tommy?
It's Tommy.
But, like, Maury gets done with an ice pick in the back of his head. That's a one-shot situation.
Mm-hmm.
But they needed that one to be quiet.
Yeah.
Every other time you see one of those two committing murder, offing somebody, doing a hit for the mob, it's violent repeatedly.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of shots. There's a lot of stabbings. Your whole face has gotten kicked in. Mm-hmm. And even Henry, when he beats up Bruce, it's not a little bit, it's all of it.
Yeah.
So it's this, there's no kind of finite line for them, other than the one time where it's Maury. Just stop asking questions, Maury. Yeah. And also having bad wig commercials. That is also, when we talk about things in humor, the cut to him in the wig commercial is funny as all get out to me. I could not handle my life. But, yeah, they're not allowed to be funny because somebody could get killed.
Yeah.
And then again, Tommy's inability to take a joke, quote unquote, and it's a joke that's wrapped up in something that's not a joke for him.
Yeah.
But he offs a made man without having a conversation, and it takes years for that retribution to come back to Tommy. Mm-hmm. Years.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, nothing's gonna happen, because they make comments about it kind of all the way down, right?
Yeah.
And then when nothing happens, it's kind of like, oh, they actually do think he just left town, which nobody believes that's true.
No, and when Paulie brings it up at one point to Henry, who, he's like, hey, have you heard anything about this guy that went missing? And Henry's feigning that he has no idea. He's like, oh, no, yeah, I'll keep an eye out. Like, he was at my bar, and then he was gone. We didn't see anything.
Yeah,
so I'll keep it in there. But it also tells you the big difference between someone like Tommy and someone like Paulie. And even Henry and Jimmy to an extent. Like, Henry and Jimmy and Tommy think they're a bunch of steps ahead of everyone. And, the family, the organization, the greater families, because I don't think Billy Batts was part of their own family. Like, he was made in a different part of things. They think they're so smart, and they're not so smart.
No, everybody knows what happened.
Yeah, and when they know, they also know that the best course of action is, like, we have to do this the right way, as you talked about before.
Yeah.
There is a set of rules of engagement here. We don't go shooting up a place where Tommy is in bright daylight. We also don't do it immediately right away. It's like, this has to be payback. This has to be cold. This has to be done in a way that sends a message to anybody else in the organization that's like, we don't care who you are. You will pay for doing this.
Yeah.
And it's...
You step out of line.
Yeah.
And it will come back to get you.
And there's a difference in this movie that is portrayed between violence for intimidation and violence for cold, calculated reasons. Like, Jimmy gets rid of all of the people part of the Lufthansa heist quietly, even though they're found publicly. But, like he said, it happened over the course of a bunch of months. Mm-hmm. That was calculated because he needed them to go away so that he could keep all of the money and nothing could get traced back to him. Whereas Henry pistol whipping Bruce, any of the violence towards Karen, Tommy's stuff is all for intimidation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I like that. I mean, I don't like that, but I like the point.
Yeah.
Yep. My line was, Tommy's super hinged. Yeah, those were my big... I do have a note that says, Henry, double-crossing Polly's a bad idea.
Yeah.
And it's not even so much that he double-crosses Polly, that he lies to him, right? And I think in a similar way to Tommy in appearances, that is the one time you see it with Polly. Mm-hmm. Where he's like, I'll give you this money, but then I have to turn my back, and it's $3,200 for what is ostensibly decades of loyalty.
Yeah.
But you stepped out of line once, you get shot. You step out of line once, you get $3,200 and a thanks for coming in.
Yeah. You're
right?
on your own kid. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So in that case, and I have a couple of parts that I want to bring up, as I am one too with a bunch of these. And I've noticed that through all of our episodes so far.
What? You have thoughts about how things are shot? Weird.
Yeah, some of the filmmaking things. And at this point in time, like, this is not anywhere near Martin Scorsese's first movie. It's not anywhere near his last.
I like how we keep calling him Marty, like we're besties with Martin Scorsese.
It's kind of how he's referred to in the culture at this point
I just think it's funny because
Marty.
Like, I know Marty. Yeah. Marty. People called me Marty. Okay, that's unrelated.
It's true. Mm-hmm. This is kind of the, like... There's a debate on whether or not people feel like this is his best or greatest movie, and I think that's an interesting debate because he's made so many great movies, and also some less successful, which make it an interesting...
Can't be Nashville every night.
That's right. And Goodfellas is always in the conversation of, is this his best? It might be his best. It certainly has a lot of his Scorsese-isms as part of it.
That's a good way of putting that.
Voiceover being one of them. He uses voiceover a lot for different effects. This is probably and arguably his most effective use of it, which is really good.
I would say it's his most successful.
The zoom, the smash zoom, the sort of really quick going from far away to close, specifically when Henry's sniffing cocaine. Or when there's a spot where somebody comes into the bar and he sees them and immediately he gets up from the bar to go talk to them, like those really quick moving zooms. Yes. That's a big Scorsese thing that he's used in a lot of movies. This one, he used it a few times as well. So there's one shot when, near the end of the movie, when Jimmy is talking to Henry, when he's when they're having the conversation after the coke bust, and he's like, I'm gonna ask you to go kill this guy in Florida with whoever, and that's when Henry says, I know I would have never come back alive. Right when they start that conversation, and he shows up at the restaurant, and he says, so I was surprised. I was like, my back was up when I showed up 15 minutes early and Jimmy was already there. And they sit down and they have the shot kind of parallel to them showing on either side.
Yeah.
And they have what I am going to affectionately call the Spielberg Jaws shot. Have you seen Jaws?
Yes.
Okay, the spot in Jaws when Roy Scheider, the mayor, sees the shark, and it looks like it's zooming in and the background is moving at the same time, but he stays in frame perfectly.
Yeah.
So there's a much slower version, and you may have missed it when it was happening. But it starts out where you see, like, it's a close shot and you see a lot of the background behind the window that they're seeing.
Yeah.
And really slowly, the background, they stay pretty close to in frame, but the background gets into focus in a way where it's a lot narrowed. What's happening there is Scorsese's pulling the camera away from them while zooming in at the same time.
Wild.
To keep them in frame, but all it does is make the background look like it's changing, almost like a set change in a play. But it's very slow and subtle and gets the idea that Henry goes in and he's there to see his friend, and now his back is up, and now the walls are closing in behind him, even though they stay in the same spot in the frame.
It's interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super, super good shot. And the other shot that you mentioned, and that I actually would like, I made a point of pointing it out while we were watching it, because if I was to refer back to it now, it's tough to visualize without just having gone through it. But the scene where he goes with their kind of his first actual date with Karen, where it's like their solo date, where they go to the Copacabana Club. Copacabana. And there's the big lineup outside, and he doesn't have to wait in the lineup. He's Henry Hill. It's part of the thing. So they go in through the line, kind of in this side entrance. It's through a few, corridors. Then they go through the kitchen, talking with the waiters and the chefs and everybody.
You two every night, I'm here. Yeah.
He knows everybody. They know him. They're greeting him. He goes inside, and the maitre d' knows him immediately. Henry, hey, come here. And then the waiter swoops in with a table. They're not seated at a table. They make a table up front for him, pulling it in. Chairs come in, and he's passing money around to everybody. Then they sit down. Karen asks, what do you do? Oh, I'm in construction. I'm a union delegate. And she's like, you gave them all this money. It's like, oh, it's fine. They did a good job. Like, that's and then it keeps on that same shot going up to the entertainer, the one-liner comedian. That entire shot is a one shot. It is with
it's wild.
Yeah, it's with a steady cam, and you start doing the math as to how many background actors, how many moving parts that is. It's one of the most famous sort of oneers in cinema history of just like very long takes, very complicated shot. You're moving in and out. You're going through different, staircases and up and down, and brilliant bright light in the kitchen to low light in the Copacabana to being legitimately outside in the nighttime. Like,
yeah,
the complicated, the technical complications of that shot are kind of unbelievable, and the fact that it just exists in such a perfect. I don't know how many times they did that. I'm sure I could look it up to see how many times it took to get that. It's almost 3 minutes of a one shot, which is very, very famous and just an incredibly impressive technical achievement.
Which is funny because as somebody who doesn't watch film in that same kind of way, what that shot did is suck you in as a viewer, right? Yep. You're just so involved in Henry's here and he's doing this and he's blah, blah, that you don't really recognize that what you've just watched is a one shot until it stops.
Yeah.
And there's the violent cut to the Air France stuff. And then it's like, oh, also, I looked it up just now.
Yeah.
Because he's tucking 20s into everybody's pockets.
Yeah.
And she says, oh, you just gave everybody a bunch of 20s. So, haha, we have another union reference here.
Yeah.
I just did the math, and this is me assuming it was like 1960-something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's $200 each.
Yeah.
In today dollars.
No big deal.
NBD.
A little harder to do that. It's no $200 bills.
Slightly more challenging now. But yeah, I thought that was I was like, $20, because you think about it now, and even in 1990, $20 was a different amount of money than it was in the 60s, right? So.
Yes. The other thing, and I'm a little bit surprised that you didn't mention it at any point in time.
There was a lot to talk about.
There was a lot to talk about, and that's why I said at the start I was very interested to see where you wanted to go with this conversation. The needle drops and the music in this movie.
Yeah, actually, I'm surprised I didn't put it in there as well because I clearly love that stuff. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of use of very famous music in this one. And
Bobby Vinton,
Bobby Darin songs in it. Several songs by the Crystals and the Shirelles, and I think the Ronettes. There's a lot of girl groups from the 60s. There's also a couple of Rolling Stones songs, Gimme Shelter. Scorsese is one of his things. I think he's used Gimme Shelter as a needle drop in his movies 3 or 4 times. This one right when they're doing the cocaine cutting scene, but also Monkey Man's in there. There is a two very, very famous Eric Clapton related ones. One with Cream, where it's the slow motion on Jimmy when you can tell he's deciding to kill Maury.
Yeah.
That very famous guitar lick. But also the second half of Layla.
Yeah, we talked about that.
During the montage where they're showing all of the people that Jimmy has killed that were involved with the Lufthansa heist. Ending with Frankie Carbone, who was a very, very big part of a lot of their things, and that being he went deep enough to actually kill Frankie Carbone. That's the big one. But Layla comes back a couple of different times in at least the back half of Layla, not the
not the part you think of when you think of Layla necessarily, but yeah.
Which is, and that's probably, I think that's the one, if you ask people, they're they remember the Layla needle drop probably more than any of them. Mm-hmm. But the soundtrack is not only time appropriate and does mark, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Because there's also Jump Into the Fire by Harry Nilsson near the end when the helicopter scene's going.
Oh, the helicopter.
And I adore that song, but it is like it soundtracking cocaine-fueled 80s paranoia is kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a pretty indelible part of that movie. And not in a way that somebody like Tarantino would do, where it's like a very showy slamming a song in there, and it's like, it's the start of Pulp Fiction, and we've got
which works for Tarantino.
Totally,
that's absolutely a Tarantino style, and this is more subtle.
Yes, and a little more like fitting the mood. Like Tarantino will drop a song in there that you don't expect to hear. My Baby Shot Me Down by Nancy Sinatra at the start of Kill Bill, or like the
Correct.
5, 6, 7, 8s, the Japanese girl rock band in the middle of what's about to be the big crazy 88 like fight scene. It's just like he'll put something in there that juxtaposes what's happening or about to happen.
Whereas,
Stuck in the Middle with You in Reservoir Dogs.
Right. Yeah. Whereas Marty, Martin Scorsese's is more fitting. It's not as jarring.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's why I didn't mention it. Not because I didn't notice it. I was singing Bobby Vinton when the movie was on because I have a soft spot in my heart for that record. It's my mom's fault. So Mom, if you're listening, this is your doing. But it's that it goes so well that you notice it, but you don't. Right?
Yeah.
And you're right. I'm surprised I didn't say anything either, because I did have notes about the music, but I was so involved in the characters and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
How shocking. How unlike me to watch a movie like that.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. Yes. So that's Goodfellas. As I mentioned, a lot of things to talk about. There's even more. I'm sure you and I will have more off podcast conversations throughout our duration. Now,
at some point we have to, call this.
Yeah. I am interested to actually know overall, like your thought of the movie, just as a movie watching, like what your friends might say, like, did you like the movie? Yeah,
I would watch it again. It is, I said this at kind of the beginning of this, wherever you choose to splice that into the editing, this was probably the fastest watch of a Martin Scorsese film I've ever done. And or any other film that is 2.5 hours of runtime. It went really quick.
Yeah.
And you don't always get that.
No.
With any kind of long movie. And I think that says a lot about the characterization and the music and just the mood and everything. Fine.
Yeah.
Great.
It's edited at a very swift pace.
It is. And there's a lot to cover, so that makes sense. I'd watch it again. I really liked it. It might be my new favorite. I did want to just laugh about how Leo, I was like, whew, Henry, like, wee, baby.
Ray Liotta.
Ray Liotta's cocaine face.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, it's giving me Leo from Wolf of Wall Street. Like, that's an interesting, and even the way he treats his wife, and I was like,
yeah.
I'm getting some Leo vibes. Hi, Leo and Margot. But yeah, I would say I really liked it, and I would watch it again. I'm gonna give it like 4.5 jokes out of 5.
4.5 funnies.
4.5 funnies out of 5.
How many funnies? Funny 4.5 how?
Well, because of all the things I just talked about, and I think the only reason it loses a half for me is the violence. Although not egregious, as we've talked about, it can be difficult to watch in the way that everybody gets beaten. The shooting, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a weird thing for me to say, but
yeah, it's a very, and I mean, it's in a very short list of the greatest gangster movies of all time for a lot of people. I think most people, you can't really deny how well done this is. This is the, like, if we're talking gangster movies specifically, if The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2 are maybe top of the heap or close to the top of the heap, they are like the opera of gangster movies.
Yes.
Goodfellas is the pop culture of gangster movies.
That's a good way of putting that, yes.
It's one of the, it's a fast pace. It is of the time. It places itself, the set decor. You know you're in the 70s. You know you're in the 60s. You know you're in the 50s. Whereas with something like The Godfather, it's like this is elegant in a lot of ways. So it does carve its own path for sure.
And I think it maybe makes the things, like the high points for me are, it is based on true story. It's based on a book and a true story. And now I need to go Googling more crime family things. So is this the OG of true crime podcasts, is this movie?
Oh, boy.
That's a discussion for another day. And another show, not this one.
And another show. Somebody it probably exists already.
I'll just have to check it out.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where we're going to wrap it up. And we are going to go into our next film, which in our quid pro quo style of doing this is back to a movie I haven't seen.
And I can't believe you haven't seen The Chronicles of Narnia.
At least the first one. Is it The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
Yes, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the first one.
After that, yes. So that will be next, our next episode. Thank you all for listening. We do now have an Instagram that you can follow to see when we post our next video. We've been doing them, or our next podcast, pardon me. We're spacing them out 3 weeks at a time, but we're going to start to post some content, about little previews and things like that. So it's if you search "I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen" podcast on Instagram. I also have a Letterboxd account too. If you want to follow me on Letterboxd, it's Maddie236 on Letterboxd. Until next time.
Thank you so much.